Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. My name is Brandon Joffe. My hope with this podcast is that I can touch on relationship and mental health issues in a way that is more helpful than some of the resources out there, and that we can weed out some of the unhelpful trends in the industry of mental health and figure out what really works in fixing our relationships and the stuff that doesn't feel so good going on in our heads. The Inspired Resolution Center is dedicated to helping families with teens, so I'm going to talk a lot about teen mental health, parenting, and of course, the different family relationships that go on in families with teens. So excited to have our guest today, Kyle Zimmerman. I kind of bugged him at the end of a service one day at my church. He is the head pastor for Orange Friends Church. And he gave a sermon that incorporated Pinocchio of all things. And looking back, I should have guessed it. In fact, I'm kind of jealous, Kyle, because I wish I had the idea for my parenting group, but I'm stealing it from you. And I didn't feel like I should steal it from you unless I at least admitted it to you and had you on a podcast and gave you credit for it. But that sermon, you do a great job. I love the church. I'm fairly new to the church. What I especially love about you is that your sermons, for the most part, are really applicable. In any Joe Schmo that comes in the door is going to get something out of it, even if they get rid of all the Christian-y stuff. There's something out of it, and I felt like that about this sermon. But welcome to the podcast. You want to tell anything I missed, who you are, and how you came to give a sermon using the story of Pinocchio as the topic?
Yeah, I love that. Well, first of all, thank you for being willing just to have me on. And thank you. You don't need to give any credit to me. Like we borrow and steal everything from everyone. So take anything. But happy to be with you and share whatever it is God gives me with anyone.
I appreciate it.
How God gave that to me, was random. We were looking for a vacation as a family. I have 4 kids, 23, 20, 19, and 17, 2 boys, 2 girls. And so time with them is harder to capture now, even in the summer with different schedules. Some of them are working, some of them are in college, one of them still in high school, many play sports. So, we were looking for what can we do together just to put everyone in the same space. And so for us, the answer, being in Orange County was what it is for a lot of people. It's Disneyland. Let's just, go bleed bunny for the day.
Right.
So we did that. It was fantastic. And literally one of the last experiences as a family was just on our way out of the park, those little rides you go through. And so just taking them through a lot of the childhood memories I had growing up. But when we came out of Pinocchio, after going through the ride, I was like, did you guys see it? Did you see what we just happened? Like we just rode through the gospel, you know what I mean? And just kind of got lit up about that.
And I'm sure they got as lit up about it with you, right? They were just super pumped.
Yeah, lots of eye rolls and like whatever, Dad, But that's kind of where the idea came, and that's what turned into that Father's Day. I think it was Father's Day's message.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you used the story of Pinocchio to basically, it reminded me of the prodigal son. And I love that story. What I love about the prodigal son is that, again, no matter what, whether you're Christian or you're not, there are so many little mini lessons and ideas on how to parent and how to be a child. And then obviously how to be a child of God in it. But same thing with your sermon. I mean, I never would have thought of Pinocchio. I just saw the surface of it, but it really is a story of a child and a father. And it could have been the child and the mother. Yeah. It's the story of a child with all the good intentions in the world, right? Like most of our children. Our children don't just come out. I know some parents think the children just come out bad, but they don't. Right? They come out, and I think humanity as a whole, children as a whole, have good intentions. They want to be cared for, and they want to care, and they love, and they're just not taught that yet. But you've got this child who wasn't a child, becomes a child, who just wants to be accepted. And I think that's every child's base is I need to, and I want to be accepted, right? Not just, and you think it's just accepted by family, by the father, but just accepted and seen. And because of that desire to be accepted and seen, this child goes down some pretty gnarly paths. I mean,
Yeah.
gets wrapped up in things that a lot of people go, hey, once you're there, you're done. You're out.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
the story, like the prodigal son, is one. But what I like that I don't think everybody sees in the prodigal son is there's a pursuing, right? That the father is pursuing the child.
Yeah.
In Pinocchio, and you really spoke to that. But as I say that, what comes to mind, and what?
Yeah. I think a couple things. I think it began both stories, whether it's the prodigal son or Pinocchio, or even our own story biblically, but they all began with this love of a father. And it was the love of the father for his sons, the prodigal son. And you see, obviously in Pinocchio, this craftsman carefully, like, just pouring his heart into every single detail, in this little wooden boy. And so I think they begin with this deep place of love and desiring relationship.
I like that.
And then obviously, Pinocchio, when he comes to life, he goes out and he, like you said, he wants to be a real boy, and ends up dealing with things that lots of us deal with: rejection, from school, or people not believing him, and identity. And so he ends up doing the other thing lots of us do, which is just buying the easy lies. Yeah. Hey, I can help. I can do this, and I think that's where we all, and where he starts to veer off course, that leads him into these places, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just lies, it's instant gratification, right? The lies in a shallow way, all the lies look correct. It's not like they're totally lies. They're the gaslighting, manipulative lies. And then it becomes very quickly a pursuit on Pinocchio's end of, I need to be seen and heard, and I need what I want when I want right now.
Yeah. The whole thing about Pleasure Island.
Exactly.
Right? Which is one of the big parts of I love it.
Addiction.
They call it Pleasure Island, You can have anything you want, anytime you want, with anyone you want. Yeah. And it's like, that's the biggest lie I think we buy. Absolutely. So, that's freedom. Yep. That's going to give me the life and the value that I really long for. And really, it just leads, even in the movie, what I love the way they illustrated is they turned into donkeys. Right. It's like, what do I look like to you? Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, that's how all of us end up, feeling, if it's not even the way we look. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've actually used Pinocchio in some speeches I've given recently on addiction, because it's such a similar path. And I have been really able to help people recently in doing that, showing people that the pursuit of this identity of childhood is very closely linked to this pursuit of, I want to feel good and I want to be okay, that leads to addiction. And so that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. But so as we look at that, right? So the story, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because Geppetto, the father, pours into this boy. Pinocchio goes down the wrong path. He has people who promise him things that are instant gratification, and he wants what he wants when he wants it right now. He gets impatient, even though he's willing to do anything to become a real boy. And so he's becoming a donkey or a jackass, right? Yeah. And he's got his closest friend who becomes one. And then, so the interesting thing, what I want to hone in on, because this is for parents, is we've got Geppetto who pursues Pinocchio.
Yeah.
But there was a clip that you showed, and I could be wrong, but I realized that Geppetto was willing to sacrifice a lot, but he didn't sacrifice himself completely. He didn't sacrifice his morals, his values, even though he sold a bunch of stuff to go on the trip. He didn't enter into Pleasure Island.
Right.
Right. He never crossed certain lines. And to me, that spoke to some messages that I really try to show parents, because parents struggle with, how far do I actually pursue my child to save them, to make them okay? And some parents sacrifice everything. Some parents sacrifice nothing. Some parents just get angry. And that was the other piece that I saw, was there wasn't a resentment or an anger with Geppetto on what he did sacrifice to help his child.
Yeah.
And so I kind of throw a lot at you just now. Sorry for that.
No,
But
that
any
was
thoughts?
something that was, no, that makes total sense. So it was something not only was interesting to me in the movies, but it's conversations Holiday and I have had along the way with now teenagers and a couple kids in their early 20s. How far would we go? What are we willing to do to not just demonstrate our love for our kids, but really to help them make sure they can find their way, give them the best opportunity to find their way to become everything they were created to be in this world.
Yeah.
And so to me in the movie, what I love is, Geppetto, the last thing he says to Pinocchio as he's leaving, if you get in any trouble, just come home. You know what I mean? Just come back, and that's where, of course, Pinocchio gets lost and he never comes home, doesn't come home for dinner, and that's when he knows he's in trouble.
Yeah.
And I love what you highlighted. Instead of, they don't show the movie where Geppetto's rolling his eyes and like, I can't believe it. And that kid, he screwed up again. I mean, there's no guilt. There's no shame. There's just a sense of being totally distraught over knowing he's in trouble. Yeah. And so, he sells all of everything that is meaningful to him. At least in one version of the movie, he sells all these clocks, which he had made, which the way they kind of set it up in the movie is that his wife had passed away. And the reason he never sold the clocks in the first place was because she loved them. And so there's this deep emotional connection that's powerful for him, not just making money and trading his livelihood, but something that's really meaningful and valuable also to go get the most valuable thing, which is, his son who's still alive. So that's, a couple things there that I think are important. And, Holiday and I have talked along the way, and thankfully, we never had to make decisions about would we quit our jobs?
Yeah.
Would we, sell cars to provide resources, what I mean, for our kids, whether it was counseling or therapy or rehab or things like that, if they needed, would we, how far would we go and could we go?
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, those are tough things because I think what God's going to lead a person and a family to, in every case, they're all different.
Yes.
So while there's labels for lots of different relationships and addictions and things like that, every scenario and every story behind them, how people got there and what God wants to do to lead them out, there's some differences too.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's
and I love that you and your wife have talked about this. What do you sacrifice to help your child? Right? What don't you sacrifice? And it is different. I wouldn't say it's different for every kid. It's different for every family and the dynamics and the resources that you have and the ramifications of giving the help. Okay. Yeah. And being, I mean, we are just getting to know each other, but I've been listening to you for quite some time now. And so you have taught me. And so I do look up to you and I don't look up to many, but I do want to hear what you think about my, I guess, assessment on what to sacrifice. Okay. And this is what I teach.
More on that.
Okay. So my assessment on what you sacrifice is, number one, you don't sacrifice anything that's going to ruin other relationships in your life. Okay. Including your spiritual relationship, and not just that one.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't sacrifice something that's going to ruin a relationship with your other children. You don't sacrifice something that's going to ruin your marriage. You don't sacrifice something that is going to take your family out and completely ruin the future in a way that people can't come back from. Okay.
That's good.
I think that you don't sacrifice something that's going to steal from your own identity and spirituality.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that seems like the baseline, right?
Right. And so that's the baseline. I think you do sacrifice things that can be recouped quickly. For instance, I'm willing to sacrifice financially for my daughter, but I'm not willing to lose my home. Now, this is going to sound wild, but if I owned a home that was completely ridiculous and not necessary, then I might. Now, again, this is opinion because I own a home that some might think is ridiculous and not necessary, but this is like the home in my fantasy that I wanted to provide for my child.
California.
I live in California. So again, this is so just circumstantial. But, I think that depending on the circumstance, I'd be willing to sacrifice as long as I knew it wasn't enabling. However, here's the issue. I believe that if I sacrificed so much for my daughter that I lost my home that I own, it would be because I've been very diligent in getting this home. I'm not overextended. I'm not like, I make my mortgage payments. I've got good equity. So I'm doing the whole responsible Dave Ramsey thing. But
Yeah.
if I were to lose my home to help her, I believe it would enter into enabling.
That's good.
Okay. And so it's not about, would I be willing to sacrifice this home for her to be okay? Absolutely. Could I do that in a way? So if she had cancer, I would sacrifice. If she was an addict, I would sacrifice a certain amount of money, a certain amount of my time, but not to the extent that I lost my home, because I truly believe that that would be me entering into the enabling realm.
That's interesting. One of the thoughts that came to mind just listening to you describe that sort of hierarchy, or at least kind of where the boundaries exist and some of those things and some of those thoughts, was what I hear you say is God has first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in that, my trust, my dependence, my wisdom, my life is found in and through and first and foremost Him. So everything else then comes after that. So if that's true, then it becomes an issue of stewardship.
Okay.
So everything I am and everything I have comes from Him, including my kids. So it's easy to think for me that they're my kids. And even in that, the language I think is good, and I think He delights in it. And yet at the same time, they were never mine. They're always His. And He's given them to me as this incredible gift that I get to steward, not like the same as every other resource, because clearly what we're saying is their value is inherently different. But yet at the same time, I'm stewarding something that God's given me.
Yeah.
So I have to trust and believe that He takes first place. When I heard you start talking about the enabling, it's almost like if you're sacrificing so much, or you're not even listening to what God has to say in this, it's almost like all of a sudden your kids can start to take first place. And all of a sudden it's not just enabling to me, starts to say, well, maybe I'm now worshiping my kids, you know what I mean, in a different kind of way, or placing their health. I'm going to do everything and sacrifice for them, when really it's, I'm stewarding them as best I can as a gift from God.
Yeah.
In addition to all the other, and believing that He's going to provide everything that I need and everything that they need along the way.
Yeah.
So like you said, not compromising my relationship to Him, not compromising biblical beliefs and values that I'm going to hold on to, not compromising, the wisdom of all those things, but yet doing everything I can with all those things to make sure they feel loved and seen and valued and cared for, and are given every opportunity to experience God through me, even in powerful ways.
Yeah. I love that. And as I think about what you're saying, something that came to mind for me is that, again, whether you're a believer or not, all of this holds true. Okay. And so that's something I love about our faith is the lessons are, it's kind of like truth. It is what it is. And one of those is what it is moments that I just had as you were speaking is, no matter what, whether you're a believer or not, you cannot take responsibility for your entire child's journey. It doesn't matter. What that means is you are actually doing your child a disservice by taking responsibility for their entire journey. You are doing them a disservice by taking credit or taking blame. And so for me, I went through my trials and tribulations, and without my failures, without my most just horrible mistakes, I wouldn't be who I am and what I am today. However, I am one of those very lucky few who had faithful parents who walked alongside me no matter what. Now, I actually think my parents sometimes enabled me a little bit too much, but I don't think that they meant to. But they did let me fail.
Yeah.
And they let me fail miserably a few times.
Yeah.
And I continue to fail at quite a few things. Yeah. But without their failures, I am not fulfilling what I could be. And for you and I, it's God's hope for us and God's,
Yeah.
for me, I think God's plan is ever changing. It's not this predestined matter of fact thing, but it's like a relationship with a child, a parent with a child. And for my child, right now, my hope for her is that she becomes a famous chef who is also a professional surfer. However, everybody else wants their child to go to college. I'm like, you know what?
You're like, no,
I've got everything I can teach you. Let's just no. But I know that's going to change, and it's going to keep morphing as God's plan for us does. But without the failures, I'm not okay. And I think we see that in this sermon, in the story that you gave.
Yeah, I think a couple things that I thought about. One of them was, as I have had to navigate, just being a dad and trying to help our kids through, whether it's failure or tough chapters, a couple of things. One of them is we realize, and things I started telling them when they were younger is, look, the mistakes you're making today, I know they feel painful. The consequences are challenging. I'm like, but they're really inexpensive.
Yes.
There's the things that you can do. You know what I mean? It's like the lessons now, the consequences now, I know it feels overwhelming. And I said, but in many ways, I'm really glad that you're experiencing this now instead of, in your late teens or 20s or 30, because the challenges and consequences and pain of these things gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
I think that's true for us as parents. So for me, it became, when they're going through difficult things, whether it's difficult things that life brings their way or difficult things that they brought their way through their own choices. Mm-hmm. I think the first instinct oftentimes for me as a parent is want to try and remove the pain. I want to try and alleviate the tension. I want to try and mend the world around them and stuff. And I've just had some really wise mentors and people in my life say, don't try and change it. Try and teach them how to go through it.
Yeah, I like that. I love that. That's huge.
So, for me, it just reshaped from even when they were younger. Like, the world isn't going to bend to them. Hard things are going to come their way. Mm-hmm. Like I said, just because this world is hard and it's evil and it's broken, there's going to be chapters of pain, and they're going to do dumb things. Yeah, we all do things. Yeah. So I want to mitigate those as much as possible, but how do I teach them how to go through it well? Yeah. Instead of, you can't avoid it all. And that's so then how do you walk through it? Yeah. In a healthy way.
How do I walk alongside my child in their journey? Not how do I walk ahead of them? Not how do I walk for them? Not how do I eliminate myself from the picture because I don't want to suffer the consequences of it, but it's how do I walk alongside them? And that brings me to some concepts that I want to, they came to mind that I teach a lot, and it'll be interesting to get your feedback. So number one is boundaries. What I saw in your sermon is the definition of boundaries. First of all, my boundaries are I'm going to protect myself, and I will not sacrifice for my child something I am not willing to sacrifice without resentment, right? I will not resent my child for what I sacrifice. I think with resentment. I think I misspoke right there. But I don't believe parents should sacrifice anything that they're going to resent.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And so with that,
we're going to put that on the kid.
Right.
Exactly. It's going to become it's like, that's going to grow over time. That's going to get ugly.
And boundaries are protective, not meant to change my child. Okay. Yeah. And so what I teach parents is boundaries are protective. Boundaries are concrete. You can't put boundaries on everything, and your children don't have to buy into it. Right. Yeah. And I have to be able to control the boundaries that I'm willing to follow through. And it's not that there's consequences. The child may suffer consequences. We don't get involved in that because that would be walking for them and trying to mitigate. And what comes to mind is when your child messes up and you want to protect what you were saying, you don't protect them from the suffering. Yeah. But what parents do is they protect them from the real suffering and then create false suffering, right? I'm going to punish you over here while protecting you from the real world. And so in healthy boundaries, what we do is, hey, I'm willing to help you so far. However, you're not going to take my morals away from me. Or, an example would be like in the Pinocchio story. I'm not going into Pleasure Island with you to seek you down, but I'll stand right outside of it. And when you want to come home, right. When you want to come home under my boundaries, which means you're not bringing Pleasure Island into my home. Yeah. If you try to bring Pleasure Island into my home, you're out. And it's not that you're out. It's just that stuff doesn't come in.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's this powerful pursuit, because he tried to tell him, like, when you get in trouble, implying that we know there's trouble out there, just make sure you come home. And he didn't. So he still pursued. But like you said, he wasn't willing to compromise.
Right.
And he couldn't take away the pain that Pinocchio had experienced, but he also didn't exacerbate it.
Yes. I love that.
That's something, that I've seen with my kid. When kids are younger, we essentially have to create consequences. Right. Whether it's whatever they look like for you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the bottom line is we have to create consequences for them where they don't feel it, because that's the way the world works.
Yeah.
There are consequences to the choices we make. So we're teaching them this life principle that there's consequences for every decision. When they got older, when they become teenagers, they experience the consequences the world gives.
Yeah.
And I found myself, I don't need to add to that.
Yeah.
And I would tell them, I said, look, what you're experiencing already, you know what I mean? Whether it was from a team or a school or a relationship or the pain that it just brought into their life, I go, that's consequence all enough on its own. I don't need to add to that.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, is there are boundaries that exist in the world that are for your good, which again, you go back to God from the very beginning. Boundaries are loving.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what's best for you.
Yeah. Well, and it's so I'm going to take that a step further, because it's not just what's best for you. It's what's best. So in God's respect, it's best for you, me, and the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so when parents set boundaries, I actually have parents say, this boundary is healthy for me and it is good for you and best for you too, but that's irrelevant. Right.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like a wild message, but it becomes sustainable, not the chasing around what's good for you. Then we're trying to pick out what's good for you. What's good for you. No, we're only setting boundaries that are good for you. No, I'm setting boundaries that are healthy for me and you. And my identity, my life is important. And that, I think, is a healthy model for kids. And you said something that I'm actually going to tweak, and feel free to disagree, because I actually don't know that I love how superficial we make kids' boundaries growing up. Because if for instance, my daughter is 4 years old, and there are certain things. So, for instance, I don't want to experience family dinner with her being a pill and throwing a temper tantrum at dinner. Every Wednesday night, my family gets to dinner. It's kind of like Blue Bloods, that show. And so we're just on Wednesday instead of Sundays. And when she's screaming, crying, about eating something or whatever temper tantrum she's throwing, I don't want to experience that. I don't want my friends and family to experience that. I don't want, if I'm in a restaurant for other people, I take her outside, and I am willing to sacrifice my time in that.
Yeah.
However, what I'm not willing to do is be a part of her disturbance.
Yeah.
And interestingly, what I found is when it just doesn't matter. So for instance, I want to experience family dinner.
Yeah.
Okay. I will pick her up, take her, and put her in what we call the calming chair.
Yeah.
I will remove myself and sacrifice that. I will sit with her for exactly 2 minutes, because that's all I'm willing to give up for family dinner. Then I want to get back to arguing with my brothers. But what I've noticed is what she will do over time is she knows, like, well, I've got a choice, right?
Yeah.
You take that to a bigger piece. Okay.
Yeah.
Family vacations. I work with so many families who go, I don't know what to do. Every family vacation for the last 17 years has been horrible. I said, don't take them. If you can afford to go to Hawaii, you can afford to have somebody stop by your house to make sure they're not messing it up, and don't take them. And I've had families go, what are you talking about? I can't do that. That's not right. No, it is right, because you deserve to have a vacation. You work your booty off. You have built the family that you want. You go on vacation. They can't behave right now during this season.
Yeah.
Right. And set a boundary. I'm not saying don't take them on one, but set the boundary.
That sounds like another little principle that, like, these things I started saying, trying to find ways to help a 6 to 10-year-olds understand the way life works. Another one that my kids are very familiar with, which it sounds like what you're talking about now, is the idea that responsibility creates opportunity.
Yes, I love that.
So I started trying to teach them that when they're kids. It's like, look, when you're responsible with what you have, again, it's grounded biblically, but it's just, again, it's just true in life.
Yes.
It's not just what the Bible teaches. Like, we know that when we're responsible at work, when we do a good job, we get promoted, we get more opportunities. And when we're irresponsible, when we don't manage what we have well,
right,
opportunities tend to get taken away. So it's kind of like what you're talking about. That gets tied to boundaries, which is cool. Right. When, it's like when we're walking this way, responsibility there creates more opportunity. And the inverse is also true.
Yes, exactly. And parents have a hard time with that because they have this fantasy of, but I want my child to experience this, but I also want them to learn over here. And I'm sorry, but you walk alongside your child as they suffer the consequences of healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
You don't fix it for them. And that brings me to the idea of putting the relationship first. Geppetto put the relationship first, but he didn't sacrifice himself for it. And so putting the relationship first for me means that you don't react to your child. You don't yell just because they deserve to be yelled at. You don't respond in kind to them, but you maintain, as long as you have healthy boundaries, you get to put the relationship first.
Yeah.
You're not bringing me down because the mean words that you said to me, the horrible way you tried to treat me didn't ruin my life and my household because I had healthy boundaries. Therefore, no matter what, I can love on you like Geppetto did, like the father of the prodigal son did, like Jesus, like God does, like to us. It's just, I can love on you because I've got boundaries, baby.
Yeah. Well, I think so the first thing that came to my mind was the idea, again, of God as our creator and the one who therefore knows us best and loves us the most. And the other thing we see with Jesus all the time in the Gospels is he's always seeing more in people than they ever see in themselves.
Which is what a parent should be able to do.
That's right. And so that's partly what I was hearing you say is, to me, what came to my mind is we're not making the choice or the behavior the identity. Yeah. So in other words, it might be something they did at the moment, but it's the way I used to describe it to my kids, even to this day, is I know that's not who you are, and I know that's not who you want to be.
I like that.
So I'm constantly, even in the choices, going, I know this is just a choice you made. I know you're not happy with the choice you made. Yeah. And I know this isn't your heart. And I know this isn't who you want to be. Yeah. Kind of a thing. And just basically subtly trying to constantly remind them of their identity. And that they're so much bigger than what this is. And don't let this moment, this choice define, because I think Satan has that's part of the way, right? It says, oh, you are your worst decision and you are your worst moment. And see, this is the path you're on now. And it's like, no, it's not. Nope. That's a total lie. And so, anyway, that's the first thing that came to mind is like you said, I'm not sacrificing the relationship. Yeah. And I get to try and fight hard to continue to see my kids for all of who God created them to be. Yeah. And all of who I know they want to be. Yeah. And not allowing any of these choices or moments to become bigger than they are.
I love that. There's this thing I teach, don't have insane conversations with your child. And we know insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Yeah. However, it is not insane to constantly and consistently see the good and see the potential in your child, as long as you have those healthy boundaries. Yeah. And you can pursue them in that way as long as you have the healthy boundaries. And that brings me to kind of the hierarchy that I think also helps people have healthy boundaries. My hierarchy that I teach is God, self, then the marriage, and then the parenting. Yeah. And that's really hard. And so for parents who are not married, it's God, self, parenting, but there's a little subcategory. At times you have to put the relationships that are building you up in a healthy way first, but only at times. And so it becomes a little bit different once there's a divorce. However, God, self, marriage, then the parenting relationship. And that's the hierarchy of relationship. And it doesn't mean be selfish. It's a consideration, not I'm going to fulfill my every whims and desires. It's a needs-based system.
Well,
if that makes sense.
And I think that's an important distinction.
Oh, it is.
Right. Because I've seen the even if God is in the right spot, I've had friends in their pursuit of self, whether it's the pursuit of the CEO of self, or whether it's in the pursuit of health, physically or emotionally. I've seen the pursuit of self, even with God in its right place, literally create all kinds of marriage and family issues.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think what you're saying, though, what I like is, hey, if I know that God forgives me and I know that he holds my primary identity, well, then I have to work hard to understand myself, to be self-aware so I can be self-disciplined, including forgiveness and those kind of issues in my life. Because the way I understand forgiveness is the way I'm going to extend forgiveness. 100%. The way I understand provision is the way I'm going to provide. The way I understand these things is the way I'm going to live these things out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I hear you say.
Absolutely. In addition,
I think it makes total sense.
In addition, I've got to be okay, right? My relationship with God has to be okay first for my relationship with myself to be okay.
Yeah.
If my relationship with myself is not intact, my marriage is doomed.
Yeah.
If my marriage is doomed, my parenting is doomed.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. Right. I mean, we can get all of these out of order, and there's danger of all.
Sure. Absolutely.
But I've even, my kids are at the age now when they were home, for the summer for a few weeks. And even the boys are like, aren't you and mom going on a date? You guys used to go on dates all the time. Aren't you going on a date? It's like they're starting to say things like that. So there's something we modeled in here that's good. And there's something they're starting to go, what's your deal? Like, is it time for you guys to spend some time together?
I like that.
I've encouraged, Holiday and I found a rhythm thanks to mentors of ours that was like, hey, make sure you put the marriage first. Your kids are looking at it. They're paying attention to it. And to your point, it's got to be healthy and strong and unified.
Yeah.
Even in the way you parent and live those things out. And so we would take not just date nights, but we would take a few times a year, a couple nights together. And then every summer, if we had 2 or 3 weeks of vacation, we'd take 3 to 5 days of it, just the two of us.
That's good.
And it was the hardest thing we did. It was the hardest thing we fought for.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it also was the best thing that we've done. And it's something I've tried to encourage even other young parents to. And there's two young families that I get to work with. They're coworkers of mine that did it for the first time this past summer. And they're just like, it was a game changer. Like they came back just so full of energy. Cool. So I think it just makes sense what you're saying. And I've gotten to live it, and I've gotten to see other people take steps towards it.
Yeah. I think we do a good job. It's easy for people to think of date night and vacations in that. But to me, putting marriage first is also when there's a crisis with your child, you're checking in with each other first.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
And when you feel discombobulated, your partner disagrees with you and you are out of your mind. We should not parent in that way. You resolve that. You might not agree with each other ever.
Yeah.
But you resolve the feelings that are getting you resentful first. Yeah. And so I love the grand idea of going on vacations and doing date night. And that's taking care of the relationship as a whole. But minusculely, you have to make sure that you resolve your resentments. You get rid of be angry at your partner, but not once you start parenting, right?
Yeah.
Just
and
like
in front of the kids,
absolutely.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, some of the worst moments, or I feel like for me, when Holiday and I are dealing with one of our kids, walking through something, and I feel like, or she feels like, we throw each other under the bus.
Yes.
Or it's like all of a sudden, if we aren't united and this is a yes and I'm a no, it's like, oh man. And then we're trying to navigate that. Like that's been, what's funny is if, let's say that you and Holiday totally disagree and you're never going to agree on parenting the kids, but your desire is for her to be protected. You see, marriage first. Your desire is that she doesn't come out of this crisis worse. Yeah. Actually comes out of it healed. Then what's going to happen is different decisions are going to be made.
And a lot of those crisis decisions don't actually matter. Your child was not going to go become a heroin shooting bum because you made the wrong parenting decision there. And so if I put the marriage first and I go, you are totally wrong. I don't know how to stop thinking you're wrong. However, I don't want you to suffer and I don't want you to hurt.
Yeah.
That's putting marriage first.
It's so funny. Marriage is part of God's plan of redemption for us, right? In terms of, essentially it's not completion because that's Jesus, but it's the complement basically, that holds a mirror up to my life every single day for the last 25 years, including literally right before we got on this call today. Holiday was telling me, hey, can I give you, a thought about a conversation you had with, one of our sons? And I'm like, sure. It's like, I didn't want to say yes, but I'm like, I know I need to say yes,
Nice.
And she just gave me, here's a thought, here's some coaching idea. And I think when you said this, it might have made him feel like this. And you probably should circle back around and apologize and say, and she's right. So I feel like that's what you're talking about too, is trusting one another in the God self marriage kids, trusting one another to help us become again, the best people and followers of Jesus and husbands and spouses and parents we want to be. And letting them coach us.
Absolutely. 100%.
So anyway, I've experienced that even today. So
I love that. And the last thing, and we're running out of time here, but there's a difference, I think, between loving on your child, loving your child, and then always pleasing your child. I think everybody knows we shouldn't always please our children, but we get wrapped up in that. And I've already done it, and my child's only 4, and it's because I don't want to suffer the consequences of. It's not. I wish I could say it's because I love her, but no, it's not. It's I don't want to suffer the consequences of not pleasing her, and it is not healthy. Yeah, but I see that in parents who are parenting teens too.
Yeah,
and then I think this is more difficult. Almost everybody you and I encounter love their children, and we almost bank like that's some incredible thing, and it's not. It's the most basic of basics. I actually don't think it matters much in terms of your child finally turning out however they turn out. In fact, I don't think it's very influential. And my argument for that is a controversial one, but I believe that most abusive parents actually love their children. They suck and are horrible at loving on their children. And they are letting desires and angers and resentments and past trauma get in the way of them being able to love on their children. And I think to much lesser extents, we wrestle with that every day because loving on your child doesn't mean you're pleasing them. In fact, you might love on them while they attack you. You might have to love on them in a way that feels like, oh my gosh, I'm enabling them, but you're not enabling them. Right?
Yeah.
You might have to love on them in a difficult situation where they're totally and completely rejecting you. But I believe that as parents, just like God the Father never stops loving on us, we must love on our children consistently and forever and unconditionally. Loving our children unconditionally doesn't do anything for them in terms of being influenced by us. Now, that's a really controversial statement, I know. But any thoughts?
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
So a couple of things. One of them is it seems consistent with what you described as your hierarchy. Because what I heard you say is the inability to place a healthy self second is what then doesn't allow you, you know what I mean, to demonstrate unconditional love in a healthy way. Right. However, there's a different range, right? Everything from being passive aggressive and not saying anything to being outright abusive.
Yes.
But either way, all of that would come from a place of not really understanding or knowing yourself. So that's one of the things I heard.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's
what you're saying about your hierarchy. I think the other thing I hear you say, which whether it's controversial, I would agree with, which is you're saying you can feel a sense of love all day long, but unless you're actually demonstrating it in a way that the other person can receive it, it doesn't matter a whole lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I hear you say.
It's
so
not
you
going to
can
influence
say
that.
you love somebody all day long. I love that. And maybe it's changing you and the way you feel. But unless they can feel it and receive it and know it and understand it, does it really matter?
And feel it in their worst times.
That's right.
Feel it.
That's
They're
right.
totally rejecting me.
Yeah. So to me, that goes back to when I do marriages or when I teach, you might have heard this, but biblically, obviously we know there was like 7 different words that they used for love, in the Bible.
Yes. Yeah.
The holistic one. But the bottom line is where it's rooted is not just kind of the eros feeling like I feel something. Where it's rooted is in this, it is an act of sacrifice. And so for me, I'm generally defining love for people as sacrificial action.
Yeah.
It should cost you something and it should be tangible. It's something that the other person should feel
I love
and
that.
understand. And so that's kind of what I hear in what you're saying. And I like what you're saying is even in the worst or most extreme moments of our life.
Yeah.
So back to Pinocchio, or when we find ourselves at Pleasure Island and we've fueled our own selfishness and desire and chased the things that we loved maybe even more than God or ourselves or another person. And in those moments to feel tangibly loved is what's so powerful. And to me, that's God. That's grace. That's the biblical love. That's before we ever knew God existed.
Yeah.
Christ had already died, paid the price for those moments. You know what I mean? Laid out forgiveness and grace. Like that to me is what's astonishing and modeled for us. Yeah. And so then for God to say, hey, this is the way, I mean, it's what he says, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's what Jesus told his disciples. It's like, okay, so as I've loved you, so you must love one another. And this is the way the whole world is going to know. Right? And it's sacrificial action. It was right after an act of service and right before he literally dies, for all humanity. So anyway, so I get how startling it sounds for you to say what you say. And yet I go, I can see how you're putting some things together.
I appreciate that.
And you see then why it's not the extreme of that your other thought was pleasing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what I love is I'm getting to know you. I don't know you all that well, but it sounds like, I know that my teachings are consistent in your teachings, but it also sounds like it's what you're doing in parenting. And I think that it is so hard for us to be consistent. I'm not always consistent with what I preach and what I teach, but...
And neither am I.
I'd love to hear that. But we're trying
my way towards it, just like you and everybody else.
But we're trying, and I think that if there were more people in the community making this discussion more prevalent, everybody would say it's important, but it's just not prevalent. I really think that as a community, we could come together and support each other better in parenting our really difficult teens, because some teens are just struggling.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, but I appreciate you being on here today. And I know for a fact that our listeners are going to get a lot out of your message. And honestly, I hope that I can bring you back again. I'm sure you're going to have another sermon at some point that gets my juices flowing. So you did a great job today and in that sermon. And I thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.